Hello and welcome to Death with Deity. I'm your host, Jason, and I'm sitting down again with my father-in-law, Steve. In this episode, we're continuing on with what I believe is the third stage of grief. We've been going through the different stages of grief. We've already done both denial and anger. If you haven't listened to those episodes, I'd encourage you to go back and do that. Today, though, we are going to be discussing bargaining. And I'm going to read a definition here from harvard.edu about this stage. Here we go. Quote, "When we experience grief, we often feel hopeless and overwhelmed. It is common to be overcome by statements of what if and if only, as we experience a loss of control over what is happening. During the bargaining stage of grief, a person attempts to negotiate or make compromises. We try to make agreements with ourselves or a deal with a higher power in exchange for feeling less sad or having a different outcome. Bargaining is often irrational." And one of the examples that they give here is, "God, if you bring him back, I promise I will never lie again." So I think for our purposes here, since we are primarily concerned with how the Christian deals with these stages of grief and or loss, we're primarily focused on the kind of bargaining that you would do with a higher power. For us, that would be God, the Father. So, Steve, I'll let you take it from here. Have you experienced any kind of bargaining? And if so, what is it? What have you experienced as far as bargaining? Go ahead and tell us about it.
Yeah, sure. So first, when you were reading that definition, there were two words that kind of really jumped out at me: overwhelmed and experiencing a loss of control.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely, I would say that through this process, there have been those moments of feeling overwhelmed. And a lot of it, that overwhelmed feeling, has come from just the amount of information that was shared at various times in the various stages. So ending up in the hospital, learning that I had a tumor that needed to be removed, and it was important. They needed to get it out ASAP.
Yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, so if they could have done it, if they would have had their team assembled in that evening, that Saturday evening, they would have done it. So that big of a deal. And then coming out of the surgery and hearing more details and all that information, and realizing just how bad it was for me, where I was really at, that I was on the verge of death that day, and yet I didn't feel it. You know, I was not feeling well, which was what led me to the hospital.
Sure.
Learning just how bad off I really was, and that could have been my last moments on earth, was overwhelming. That's just was a lot to have to take in.
Sure.
And I think that plays into the experience of a loss of control, where I had literally just come off of a week working extended hours, doing a lot, handling a lot, juggling things at work and home, and
Sure.
feeling completely in control of my life. And all of a sudden now,
Yeah.
I
From master of your little universe to now you've got this limited amount of time and there's nothing you can really do about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those were two words that really just jumped out at me in that description. And so then how does that feed into the idea of bargaining? And I was like, well, I think, definitely you can feel overwhelmed by the situation to the point where you feel the need to try to regain some of that control in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do that through maybe appealing to God and saying, God, if you only would do something for me in this respect. Now I have, the Almighty on my side, and I can regain a little bit of control. I can feel a little less overwhelmed because I know that God has my back. And so that's not that wasn't a foreign concept. Although I'll tell you, I wasn't really, again, I think I might have mentioned this in a prior episode, but I really wasn't overwhelmed with the prospect of dying.
Right.
I was maybe overwhelmed by the prospect of leaving a bunch of loose ends for my wife.
Sure.
And not wanting to have her have to deal with my death. And then on top of that, all those loose ends.
Right. It's bad enough dealing with the loss of a spouse without also trying to pick up 1,000 different pieces and
Yeah.
and assume all the responsibilities that other person has historically been taken care of.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So because we definitely had roles in our marriage that I took care of certain things, she took care of certain things, and so as a result,
Right.
you know,
There's certain parts of the
she just didn't need to know those
that
things.
She doesn't contact.
Yeah, she didn't have her hand in that cookie jar, so you know she didn't need to know how many cookies were in it.
Right.
But now we're at a place where she's going to be responsible for that.
Sure.
And so I think I definitely had a sense that I wanted to get some time to tie up some loose ends and to help prepare her and I think not just physically prepare her so that she knew all the bank accounts and what was in them and passwords so that she could log in and all those little minute details, but really just so that she could be prepared spiritually as well. You don't really prepare your spouse spiritually their entire life for not you being around.
Yeah, typically not where I focus my devotions with my family.
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah.
But it does make me realize that because of that, there's things that we probably should try to find a better balance, because we don't want to reach a point where something happens to us suddenly, just like this happened to me suddenly, and all of a sudden they're just completely ill-prepared. And so that's one thing I think I learned through that process. And so I think initially in the first days of realizing that my time was short, that I remember just praying and asking God to give me some time to tie up some loose ends.
Sure.
And really for her benefit, I personally was fine if that day it had been he would have said no. No, I'm calling you home tonight. I would have been okay with that. And I know that on the backside,
yeah, you would have been better off.
Yeah, I would have been better off, and I also would have been okay with it on the backside. I don't think I would be in heaven going, I really wish you would have given
me back down there so I could tie up the loose ends.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just beyond our comprehension, but we won't be concerned with it anymore.
Exactly. So I think for me it was just...
So your bargain, more or less, that you made with God was, please give me some extra time, or at least enough time to tie up loose ends, to make things as simple as possible for the spouse and family that I'm leaving behind.
Correct.
And so...
Yeah, I thought about my kids too.
Yeah.
My 3 children and my grandchildren, and just not wanting there to be some kind of an abrupt end and them feeling ill-prepared for it. My mother died, and she died very quickly. Had been having some problems, and we thought we were getting close to answer to what those problems were.
Right.
And so we death was not on our radar. We just knew that she needed help, that there was something maybe neurologically going on with her. And And by the time they identified it, she was gone 24 hours later. And it was very jarring for, I know, for Kim and I and our children, because there was no time to prepare for that. It was she was gone.
Yeah.
And so I think that was another thing that just played out. I just wanted to, in a sense, prepare my family and make sure that they were in the best physical and spiritual place that they could be. But when I do think a little bit about, when Jesus was praying in the garden and he, said, "But nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done." I was perfectly fine if the answer was no. And if they would have come back and said, "Yeah, you're not going to make it past this week."
Sure.
I would have, I do believe I would have quickly transitioned to being perfectly at peace with that answer.
Mm-hmm. Now I put in here that I think it could be a sin depending on how you bargain and whether or not you are okay with the answer being no. I think a lot of people might have the temptation to demand a lot more from God and also not be asking for it for the right reasons. Maybe more of selfish reasons. Like you had said, it wasn't your motivation that you weren't ready to go, but I think it might be the temptation for a lot of people that they aren't ready to go, that they had all these plans that they wanted to accomplish, places they wanted to see maybe, family that they wanted to say goodbye to, books they wanted to write or read or whatever. So like, I never saw the Northern Lights, like, God, let me live to see the Northern Lights.
Or just the simple concept of Lord, I'm too young.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm only 57, and not to say that
I'm nowhere close to the average. God, don't you know that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even in my 60s yet, and how can my life be over?
I think that is an interesting. I think Christians, people at large in society, will say, "Oh, he died too young."
Yeah.
As if God didn't have a plan from the beginning for everyone to die exactly when they die. I think when Christians say that, I think they are maybe ignorantly or inadvertently, they're inadvertently sinning in a way by saying, this couldn't have been God's plan. This shouldn't have been God's plan. God was wrong to take them. He took them before their time was up.
Yeah.
I think you could very easily, I think people say it casually. Oh, God took him too young.
Yeah, I think I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if anyone cognitively realizes what they're saying when they say that, but I think I want our audience to hear that and to just make note of how you speak and think about death as a Christian. You can't look at it as if it was early. You're denying God's omnipotence, his dominion over all things, and the fabric of his narrative that he's woven for millennia, or since the beginning of time. Before the millennia existed,
Exactly.
God had written all of this. So no, it's not too early. It's exactly when they were supposed to be taken home. And it's really hard. I'm not saying it's not hard, but I think it's very important for the believer to come to grips with that.
No, I agree. And I do think that the one of the key things that we have to keep in mind is that God has your days numbered, but he also has a plan for every one of those days.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing you have to be asking yourself is, what was his plan for each one of my days? Or, I'm alive and doing well today. What was God's plan for today? And what will be his plan for tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
And God is seeking to work out his story in those plans. And if I'm only thinking about myself and what my plan is, then I'm missing that bigger overarching narrative that he is playing out.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately I'm missing out because of it.
Sure.
Because I'm so self-focused.
Yep.
I'm missing what he's actually doing in my life. And sometimes I'm resisting or fighting what he's doing in my life.
Yes.
And not even realizing that. And because I've become so blinded and hardened to the work of the Spirit, and which is shocking to say, from a Christian perspective that, we ultimately, as a Christian, we can be hardened to the work of the Spirit in our life, but we can. And we can resist those things. And so I think it's just critical that we are constantly asking ourselves, what is God's plan for my life today?
Yeah.
And because he may not have a plan for tomorrow. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't have anything that he wants to do.
His plan might be that you're in glory.
Yeah, your day might be over. And as we were talking earlier, there are plenty of people. This was shocking for me because it came so suddenly. I went from working a busy week to being in a hospital, getting brain surgery, and being told my time was short.
Yeah, you're not going back to work.
Yeah.
That part's over.
Yeah, that's over. Yeah. I'm moving on.
Yeah.
To something different.
You're retired now. Yeah.
But there are a lot of people who get in their car and head off to work, and they just don't come home that day.
Yeah.
And
even more sudden.
It's more sudden, more shocking, and there are people that are going to have to deal with that on the backside. Their family, their friends, who will just be there experiencing that shock. For that person who died, it just was abrupt. But God had a plan, and that plan involved them transitioning into glory.
Yeah.
Or moving into eternity. Either way, whether if you're not a Christian, you're not.
You're still living for eternity.
Yeah.
It'll be apart from God, and it'll be worse than anything you can imagine.
Yeah. You're not going to heaven, but where you're going is eternal. So.
And conscious. I think as we kind of skipped over there is a good example of godly bargaining in the Bible in Genesis 18 that I wanted to touch on before we close here. So maybe we'll close with this, that Abraham was bargaining with God for Sodom, the horrible city of Sodom. But his reason for doing that wasn't because he liked sightseeing in Sodom, or that he thought it was a beautiful city, or that he hadn't visited there and he wanted to be able to visit there one day. His motivation was Lot, his relative. So he wanted to save really just one person, one man in the city, and maybe his family, and he was concerned about him, and so therefore he was kind of bargaining with God to spare the whole city. And ultimately, of course, God did not. He honored that bargain and let Abraham keep on coming back over and over and over again with reducing the number of, God. Abraham, for anyone who's not familiar with the story, God comes to Abraham and says that he's going to go destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says, well, you wouldn't destroy the city if there's 50 righteous men in it, would you, God? You wouldn't do that. Far be it from you to destroy the righteous along with the wicked. And God says, all right, I won't destroy it if I find 50 righteous men there. And Abraham thinks about it and goes, well, what about 45? Let me, and he keeps on coming back, and I don't remember how far he gets down, but it's pretty low.
Yeah, 10.
Is it 10?
It's like that's last.
He's like, my last offer, God, if you find 10, and, God didn't find 10, but God was merciful despite that. And still, he knew Abraham's heart. And even though Abraham didn't say, I've got a relative Lot there that I'd really like to not burn up when you destroy the city, and God went and pulled Lot out of the city before he nuked the rest of it. And so God was merciful. He knows our hearts, and he also knows what we need. And so as Christians, we should come away encouraged by this story, that while we may bargain for something, and maybe we're asking for more, as you do with bargaining, you're asking for more than you want to actually come away with.
Yeah.
Then God granted Abraham exactly that. He saved his relative out of there, and God has certainly granted you that you are able to. You've lived long enough past this diagnosis to wrap up some loose ends and to at least start the ball rolling on things that, if you had died back in December, when you were first diagnosed or within that week, that none of this would have been done.
Yeah.
We would have missed it. We had a lovely family vacation that everybody was able to go away on together. That wouldn't have happened. It was kind of a nice, last whole family celebration that was lovely. So there's just been a number of things that God's been giving you. He's been saving a lot,
Yeah.
He's been giving you at least what you need, what he deems is necessary for the story. Even if at the end some of us go, man, I wish it was another couple months. I wish we had tied up that loose end. I wish we had gotten that password. I wish we, whatever it is.
Well, it's funny that, again, if we go back to Abraham really quick, and then we transition and close with, the comparison to my situation with Abraham and Lot, is that he asked for God to spare the city because of the righteous, and basically, gets all the way down to the 10. If you
in
find,
a whole city,
yeah, if you find 10 there, you won't do it, right? You won't destroy the city, and there was only one. So God didn't really change anything. He still destroyed the city because he couldn't find 10,
right?
But he removed the righteous out of the city.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing that the angels who came to Lot said, is that we can't do what we're here to do
until you get out of here,
until you're out, because God is gracious.
Yeah.
And he won't, basically put the righteous amongst the wicked.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes
he will separate you.
Yeah. When it comes to judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in, my situation where there's some similarities is just the idea that I was so bad off on that day that I went into the hospital before I even knew what to pray about. But God knew. God understood. Where God understood that what Abraham was really trying to get to. And God understood that there weren't 10 righteous in the city. But God had a plan to be gracious to his people. And we know that Lot was righteous because later in Scripture it said he was righteous. He gets a bad rap sometimes because of some of his actions.
Yes.
And some of the things that happen after.
Right after he's rescued.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think that God has a plan to bless his people and to care for his people and to be gracious to his people. And that's what we've seen in my life, that I could have died that day. I could have died any time since then, but he's being gracious. His word says that he abounds in grace. And I would say that that's what I've seen through this whole experience, is an abundance of grace. Not him being short or stingy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm only 57. You're being kind of stingy with me, Lord. You could let me live to be a little bit longer.
Right.
But instead, he's given me so much extra and more than I've deserved. So
thank you, Steve. This has been Death with Deity. We very much appreciate you listening. If you have not subscribed, we'd encourage you to do that so you can get the email updates. Just go to our Substack homepage. That's Hyper Premium on Substack, and it should prompt you to enter your email. If you have any questions or comments for either Steve or I, you can email me at jason@hyperpremium.co. We are attempting to post new episodes every Monday, so stay tuned for further episodes, and please go back and also listen to the previous episodes if you haven't already. Again, thank you very much for listening. Take care.